Rosemary, Sheriff.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you. What I hope today is to give an introduction and then open up the opportunity to share, because I want to ultimately be a listener. I think the slides are coming up. Yeah, so my name's Rosemary Sheriff. I'm a professor at Cal Poly Humboldt. I've been a community member in the North Coast since 2009, and I'm native Californian. My kids are in the school system, so I just mentioned that to mention that I deeply care about this, in addition to being the lead, one of the leads on this report for the North Coast. So California has put out climate change assessments, and I'm going to be pretty fast and brief. And the goal, and this is the fifth one, and the rollout should come in roughly January 2026. So we're in the process of developing it. And one of the points of these reports is to seek diverse expertise, including community, and what's happening on the ground. So that's why I'm here to talk to you about this. And so we want information from decision makers like yourself, but also community and other organizations, from local and tribal and other organizations. So just real quick, there's been a process, and what I'm here to talk about is the North Coast, the regional assessment, which includes 5 counties, and I'll get to that in a minute. And one of the components at the top there, if you want to look at the slide, is that public engagement and outreach, which is part of what I'm trying to do today. And then again, there are many different components of the California 5th Climate Assessment, but we are focused on the regional one for our region. So the regional synthesis reports, there are 9 regional reports. They all focus broadly on these 3 topics: natural and working lands and waters, built infrastructure, and then social and cultural systems. Now, of course, that looks different. The importance of those things are different in different regions and in different counties. So this is a map of the 9 regions, and so the orange up in the North Coast obviously is pretty large. So we have Del Norte, Humboldt, Trinity, Mendocino, and then part of Lake County as our region. So that's pretty broad if you think about the geography and the issues and concerns in those areas. Yes. Sorry if I didn't mention that. And I'm going fast because I only have 15 minutes or so, but I will be happy to follow up. Okay, I'll slow down a little bit, okay. So this is funded through, and there's not a lot of money, to be honest. It's just that there's support to develop the report. But it's an initiative through the Governor's Office of Research and, what do they call it? Research, and I'll remember it later, but it's through the Governor's Office. And so they have given us sort of these key themes, and our role for the North Coast is identify which key themes actually make the most sense to focus on, that have policy implications and hopefully money attached to that eventually to make changes. So I won't list all of these individual themes, but you can see there are climate-related events and trends, sea level rise, for example, drought, flood, wildfires. Some of these affect our region more than others, say, for example, contrasting in Southern California, and then natural, built, and social systems. So without going through that list, you can see it's a long list, and some things, again, are more important and vary, and also overlap, right? These are overlapping and confounding issues. So our role, and I'll get to who we are, there's a number of us, is to oversee this report for the North Coast and to lead specific topic issues. So we are each have different expertise, and we're working together as a team. We also want community engagement. We want to hear from people. We want to hear from you about what's important for Del Norte and broader locations. We are also coordinating other experts and authors and those people who want to give input, literally, like verbally or written. We're open to that. We're doing a number of other things, and then we're leading and supporting engagement events. And one of the things we're trying to do is reach out like this and talking to people individually, and then also having engagement events, but also there are events that happen in these counties, and we want to try to participate in that and capture that audience to share and hear from them as well. And we've done a little bit of that, but this is part of the process. So there's the coordinating team, and you may not be able to read all the fine print, but Andrew Stubblefield and I are kind of the co-leads for this. We're both professors at Cal Poly Humboldt with different expertise, but we also have a broad range. So we represent in general, science, social science, indigenous knowledge, indigenous context, and so we are trying to reach very broadly and be a really collaborative group, and so far we're really excited. And I would say our region is the only one that has the level of coordination rather than just one or two people at the top. So you could reach out to any of us, and we meet every week about this, and we are continuing to work on different parts and then collectively work together. So I will come back to this, and then just a couple more things, and then I want to open it up. Again, I mentioned that the goal is input. And so I've talked to Dean Wilson, and I really appreciated that conversation. And we've talked to a few other supervisors in other counties, and we are continuing to reach out. We're reaching out to the tribes, and like I mentioned, in other ways. We get so much information and the variability of what's important in one county, what's consistently important across the region, but also that importance of the variability is really key. And I am a geographer, so I take that very seriously, which is thinking about, the broad context, but also the diversity. So we have, we are taking input, individual meetings, going to events, trying to coordinate events when it makes sense. We have a survey and that we can send out, so I just, have a picture of that, but I'm not going to go through that. It touches on all of these different components, like what do we need to know? What are the issues because of climate changes? What are the synergistic interactions? What are the natural and working land? What are the priorities? What do you think is important? And then built environments and social systems and cultural resources. So that was pretty fast, but I just really want to open it up and leave it on the list of us, any of us you could reach out to. Some of you may know many people, Keith Parker, for example.
I just want to thank you for your time. The conversation that we had, I thought was very valuable, just to relay information and get an exchange. I encourage anybody that has a vested interest in this topic, my fellow board members as well as others, to do that, to engage. Our conversation lasted well over an hour, and it was very informative, not only for me, but also trying to highlight the issues that Del Norte County has been dealing with, and what the impacts have been on multiple events that have, from our wildfires to our coastal erosion to impacts to our economy, as well as areas of our concern that we've been addressing for a long period of time. 199 corridor, the 101 corridor, the bridge, the tunnel that's now been determined to be put in to bypass the last chance grade. All those were issues that we had discussions on that were both informative to me, that your position as far as what you're hoping to get out of the study. And I encourage anybody that's listening, anybody that's here that really feels passionate about these issues, that has some information or specialty knowledge about some of the areas that we have. I know on the board, there's a lot of us that have really detailed information, whether it's about ag or the fishing industry or about, some of the impacts societally, the impacts that we have and the challenge that we face here in Del Norte County due to our economy are all issues that are impacted by this. And I thank you.
Just if I can follow up on that, just as I mentioned, we meet as a group every week, and just yesterday we met, and I can tell you that the conversation that we did have has implications already for thinking about what we're putting in these different chapters. So we really want to encourage individuals and to reach out to us, because we are really taking this very seriously about input. And then another thing I may have mentioned, but may not have, is that if you have others you think that we should be talking to, or organizations, we really want to hear from you, because, I'm in Humboldt, I'm not in Del Norte, and so on, and, I'm not in Lake County. That's an issue too. So we're trying to reach as broadly as we can.
Supervisor Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, I appreciate the presentation, and I want to piggyback and then obviously add to the conversation, because that's why you're here, is to listen, on Chair Wilson's comments on societal impacts. And I'm glad he brought that up, because as a rural county, as a county that's experienced a lot of change over the last 40 years, societal impacts as it relates to our community's health is extremely important. And we're always at the bottom of the wave and get buried every time there's a policy change in the state of California. And then we're left with the ramifications to our community, more importantly, the demographics, and creating pretty much a place of poverty and being at the bottom of the totem pole. So as policy is derived, especially from academics at in this case, Cal Poly, Humboldt, I always want to be in this position of communication and to have that open sounding board, because there's been a lot of policy that's been developed over the last several decades that has created what we now as Del Norters live with today. And there's not a lot of ways to march that back, but we know that we need to. And I'll give you an example, and I'm glad to see at the top of your group here, Andrew, just listening to Audrey Betancourt, Director of the California Department of Conservation, and the work that the Department of Conservation is now doing with really trying to address the fuels loads within our forests throughout the state of California. We know, based on data-driven results, that we're sitting in many of our forests at 400 plus stems per acre, where 100 years ago we're sitting at 40 stems per acre. We know there's a resource there, yet our public lands, 80% here in Del Norte, are locked up potentially in perpetuity from being able to use that resource to generate some economic impact here again to move forward. But that's just one of many examples of how we've lost ground through policy decisions that impact our socio-demographic here. Also wanted to bring up, as we move forward, farming in particular. We're trying to hang on to what we have left here, but we've got a lot of regulatory agencies in our backyard, in particular the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board, that sets parameters through policy throughout the state that come down through that policy from the California Water Board. In essence, a lot of what's moving right now with dairies, I'm employed by a dairy here, the last in Del Norte County, and it wasn't that way when I first moved here. But some of those policy decisions have made it very difficult, if not impossible, for dairymen to operate on the north coast of California. Yet we know the model that's essentially been developed from Marin County to the Oregon border through a more pasture-based management system, allowing the cows to be out with nature, not being in a confined space like they are in the majority of these confinement operations through the Central Valley, creates more of a climate neutral approach to farming, something that I don't see talked a lot about in essence within the state of California. I see a lot of policy regulatorily that's hurting those type of operations, and yet they should, as policymakers, as folks passing legislation, be supporting if we're going to allow farming to remain here in California, especially that type of dairying. So I'd, in particular, as a resource-based economy, which we still are, would love to hear some of those conversations and have input with your organization around farming, around obviously our managed timberlands and our public lands and how that impacts us going forward. But our demographic can't stand much more policy changes and hope to sustain ourselves. So I caution the work that comes out of here, and hope you reflect back on some of these statements. And I promise to work with you into the future to add any insight that I can after my 30 years in this community.
Thank you. And if I could just briefly comment, because I really do want to be a listener. So I should clarify that we aren't making policy, but what we want to do, and we are not at all, but what we want to do is to put in those kinds of examples that point out the uniqueness, but also the importance of our region. So for example, in Northern California, we have more forests than in all of California, right? So, or the majority. And using your example of farming is a really important one. And again, that was a topic we were talking about yesterday, that we need more information about the agricultural components of things. So thank you for that. So I just want to emphasize that we want to implement a report that is useful that for policymakers to see our North Coast region. And just one more comment, we felt that the last report, the fourth one, who was written by people outside of our region, not to say they're not nice people, it was kind of ineffective in that way.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
And then unfortunately, that's one of the things that we've talked about. What we see is so much of the decision making, so much of the policy that's coming out of the state when it comes to regulation is based on issues that are far more relevant to the urban areas and the urban areas surrounding, and don't exist here and are not an issue here. Whether you're talking about water or air quality control, air quality, et cetera, they're not issues here. And yet the regulatory policies that are being drafted. So having the study, having that report helps us when we go forward to show the need or the lack of need on certain policy and regulation as they go forward. And that will help us quite a bit if it's, especially if it's addressed within this report. Thank you. Any other board member questions?
Just one more comment that we want interaction all the way around, all the way through. So you're informing what this report will include, but then we want, if you're interested in giving feedback on drafts or writing components or just providing, that doesn't really represent what we were trying to say, then we want that level of feedback. So,
and I want to reach out. I think it's October 22nd. Is that NCRP here? So October 22nd, we will have North Coast Resource Partnership, I think it is. We'll be hosting our meeting here in Del Norte County, and so that is a great organization dealing with this area specific to what you're exactly looking for, and all of the individuals that from local government as well as organizations that deal with resource management will be here, and it's a very important group to reach out if you haven't already done so. I encourage your attendance to that, and we would
absolutely.
I
guarantee one of us or more will be there. Then
we
sounds
would
fantastic.
love to host you. So
Okay,
thank you.
that sounds great. Thank you so much for your time.
Don't rush off just yet.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Joey. Just kidding. One more time. If you could expand a little bit on how is the conversation developing around energy development, in particular with your organization and getting feedback. We're paying obviously a lot of close attention to wind power generation off our coast. We know likely a lease will be put on to the block here in 2028, maybe 2027 at the earliest. We're watching Humboldt very closely. So I'm just curious how some of the discussions go. How's that feedback used once that input's given?
Yeah. So I don't know if this is the right slide to put on, but energy is obviously a huge issue, and it varies throughout the region as to what the general issues are similar, but not all the same. We have some folks who are deeply involved in energy on our team, and that's not my area of expertise, so I'm just a listener in that area. But we also are seeking out your feedback or your input and others who are very involved in that the energy. We haven't written this report, and it is generally a report that it represents our region and what the issues are, concerns for resiliency, and maybe some examples of what have already happened that are positive, that we know work, innovations, and so on. So it really is a report that we want California and the governor's office to see that is effective for our region. So I don't know. That was a pretty broad answer, but I've made a star on energy, and we know that it's a big issue. So feel free to reach out, and we will incorporate who and what you think we need to.
Right. No, I just know when the governor's office and that team gets together and starts developing this direction, I'm glad at least this fifth iteration will be locally driven. That allows for a little bit closer to home insight, and more importantly, closer to home input. I just always worry about how that input directs policy and legislation. And so with that caution, I do look forward to participating in whatever process is available.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the public? Having none, thank you so much for making your way up
Thank you
there.
very much.
Thank you. This will conclude our regularly scheduled Board of Supervisors meeting, and I want to thank you all for your attendance.